Okay, I think it has slowed down a little bit and most folks are here to join us already. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Glidden. I'm a program manager at Mass Cultural Council with the organizations team, and we're going to be talking today about our operating grants for organizations program and answering your questions about it. We have live captioning today presented by Patty Parker from Partners Interpreting. If you'd like to follow the captions in a separate device or a new window, follow the link. And just to let you know, my colleagues Lindiana Flores and Lillian Lee are helping out today, either by managing the questions in the Q&A or by providing various links. So that link is going to show up in the chat in just a second. If it hasn't already gotten there, you can follow the captions in the separate box. As I mentioned, I'm joined today by Lindiana Flores, who leads our Card to Culture program and works with operating grants for organizations, and by Lillian Lee, who runs our gaming mitigation program and works with portfolio organizations, operating grants for organizations, grantees, and also is our primary contact for all of the organizations that are cultural affiliates. That's a term you'll hear a little bit today. Cultural affiliates are programs within larger not eligible organizations. So think of art museums at universities and literary magazines at universities and things like that. Also, we're joined today by Mark Solmonte, who is our fiscal contracts officer. He is the person who knows all about how the contracting works, and we are delighted that he is joining us today. Here's an overview of what we're doing today. I will pause from time to time to answer questions. Lillian is handling the Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I believe we have disabled the chat. The chat only works for the for us to be placing the links in there that we think you'll need. We are recording today's session, and the recording and slide deck will be made available to you within a day or so after the event. If you have questions, it would be really great if you keep your questions until we are talking about the specific section of this this agenda. So for example, if your question is about grants for next year, wait until we get to number 7 on here and after we've talked about all the other items. That'll really help us focus and get all the information out where we need it to be. But have an introduction to Mass Cultural Council, an overview of this particular grant program, the process for contracts, grantee requirements, so the things that you have to do in order to get future grants in this program, the annual report requirement, how we determine and when we would determine grant amounts for next year, timeline, and other questions. So, as I mentioned, we request that you put your questions into the Q&A feature, and we'll pause every so often for those questions, and we'll answer as many of them as possible live, or if they are very specific to your organization, we'll probably try to respond to them in an email in the session.
Hi, it's
So,
Lindiana here. Oh,
no, I was just going to introduce you, so
I jumped in.
thanks.
Hi, it's Lindiana here. We're just going to give you a quick intro to Mass Cultural Council and our mission. The Mass Cultural Council advances the Commonwealth's creative and cultural sector by celebrating traditions and talents, championing its collective needs, and equitably investing in public resources. We pursue this mission through a wide range of grants, initiatives, and importantly, advocacy efforts for artists, communities, and organizations. Our funding, which is so important. We receive our annual appropriation from the state legislature and funds from the NEA and some other sources. In turn, we make thousands of grants directly to cultural organizations, schools, communities, and individual artists that use arts, science, and the humanities to build strong, diverse, and livable communities in each Massachusetts city and town. If you're interested in seeing a complete breakdown of our funding sources, you can visit the link that's going to be added to our chat box. All right. So let's celebrate together. Congratulations, everyone, in receiving an operating grant. For some of you, it is your first time receiving an operating grant. And so we are so happy this year to elevate you and center all of our first-time grantees. Public dollars make up most of Mass Cultural Council's budget. So please help us celebrate that investment by doing two things: writing to your state senator and representatives for believing in your work. Send them a nice thank you note, letter. You can snail mail, email, call them up, whatever works. And then also, please share your good news in social media. And this year we created a fun graphic for you to use, and that is located in the link that's going to be added to the chat: advocacy ideas for the first time grantees. So you should be able to access that graphic to use either on social media or on print materials as well. And not to mention, I didn't want to forget this, but we are also having some regional celebration events. And we're so excited to gather together. Our next event is going to be on Monday, December 1st. We're celebrating the Metro West region. This event takes place at the Hopkinson Center for the Arts. So please, if you're in the area or if you want to drive down, confirm your attendance by registering in advance. All right, passing it back. Oh, nope, not yet. All right, program background and history. Okay, the Operating Grants for Organizations program is our primary funding program to support cultural organizations. The program was designed following evaluation of our funding for our cultural organizations and as a response to the agency's racial equity plan, and it's strongly linked to the Mass Cultural Council's values expressed in the FY24 to 26 strategic plan. We're going to drop a link in the chat so that you can take a look at Mass Cultural's racial equity plan. And just a quick note for folks that the portfolio grant, which had been our primary operating support program in the past, is currently being phased out. And back to Sarah.
Hi. So the good news, and we have discovered over time that a couple of folks were surprised by this, but the good news is that this is a 4-year grant. We expect to give you a grant through fiscal 29. So this is the first of your 4 years, and we're very, very pleased to do that. It is an unrestricted grant. That means that any of your organization's expenses can be covered through this grant. You can pay staff, you can pay the rent, you can pay the electric bill. Whatever expenses have to go through your books are legitimate expenses for this program. For grants of over $7,000, we pay out 80% of the grant when your contract is executed. That means you've signed it and we have countersigned it and notified you that it's been signed. And then the following 20% is paid after you complete your annual report in June. So the annual reports, and we're going to get into that in some detail, due on June 2nd after we review them to make sure they are accurate and complete. Then we authorize the final amount of your grant to be paid to you. And there's no requirement to provide receipts or documentation on how the funds are spent. There are a few exceptions to this for our organizations that have been designated as getting federal funds, and I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk specifically about the annual report. Before we move on to the contract process and timeline for the contracts, are there any questions?
There are no open questions at this time. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
one just came in. When you say four-year grant, does that mean the amount awarded, the same amount is awarded each year, or the amount is awarded broken up into four annual
Oh.
payments?
That's a great question. The amount that you have been notified that you are receiving is your fiscal 26 grant, and we recalculate grants every year. And when later in this process, I'm going to talk specifically about how that is calculated. But one very important aspect of how we determine how large grants are is the annual allocation that we receive from the legislature. So if you have any hesitation about writing to your state senator and state representative to thank them for their support of Mass Cultural Council, do not hesitate, because your words to your legislators are the most effective way that you can help support us every year. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Mark, who is our expert here on how the contracts are all managed. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
No problem at all. Hello, everyone. So a little bit with the contract process and timeline. And I'm hoping that some of you have already started to see some things flow in. Again, our team is starting to get the contract paperwork out. What we're doing is we're sifting through everyone on who needs what, whether it's a Castle form or if it's a W-9 EFT form, whether you've answered that you're returning, so that we're just making sure that what we have on file matches. So that's kind of the process we're going through right now. So I would sit tight. If we feel like you need something, we will definitely be sending a DocuSign out to you. But we are in the process, us and our team, of going through all of that paperwork to make sure that we have everything for everyone. So I promise, if we do not have something, or if something doesn't match, we will be reaching out. So just hold tight on that. If we get to right around December 1st and you're still looking for questions, you haven't received something, or you're curious, then by all means, please reach out. And again, if there's something pressing, don't feel free to reach out. But we're just trying to kind of work on that right now. And again, the contract timeline. So that's kind of where I was just talking about with the Castle forms and the W-9 and EFT forms. We're working on those right now. So again, just be aware, if you do receive them, we're looking for them. If not, just hold tight. If we need to send them, we will. And then once we receive all that information back, the Castle and the W-9 and EFT form, and everything looks good on our end, you'll be receiving a separate DocuSign, which is for the contract. Sorry, Sarah, can you just go back to that previous one? I apologize. Thank you. So for the grant contract piece, so that's going to be when we receive everything, then you will be getting a different DocuSign for a grant contract. And I wanted to reiterate, there's a difference between the paperwork, which is the signatory, the Castle form and the W-9 EFT form, and then the actual grant contract. So that grant contract will go out as soon as we've received everything back and your profile is set up and everything is good. So that's the difference between the paperwork that we're trying to collect and the grant contract itself. And the timing of the contract, it depends on some factors. And that's with how the paperwork comes back, whether if you're a new grantee or if you're an existing grantee. It all depends on if your profile is set up in the state accounting system. And we do that by verifying. We can go into that system by using the EIN number that's provided on the W-9 and EFT form. If you're already set up in the system and your bank account information matches, and we also have your Castle on file, or we received your Castle and it matches your signatory and your authorized officer, then that moves things forward a lot quicker. It will get to the contracting a lot quicker. If we receive things back with errors or something that doesn't match, that's when we start to reach out, and that's what can kind of change the timing of the contract. For example, Definitely no PO boxes. It needs to be a legal name. A legal address. The legal name on the W-9 and EFT form has to match the organization that applied for this grant. It can't be on someone's name or anything like that. It has to match that, or else we'll have to resend a DocuSign that has that information on there. And also that the next piece, the signers, if it doesn't match what's in the grants management system as who is the signatory and who is the authorized officer when we receive the CASL back, or even if it's the CASL we have on file, we'll have to send out another CASL form because we needed to match for our records. So those are some of the factors that can play into it. But like I said, we're sifting through that right now and hoping, if something there is that you need, you'll be getting it, and try to refrain from questions if you can until December 1st. But if you can't, again, it's totally fine. And just this one piece of it with the cultural affiliates. If you have a parent organization or a fiscal agent, it's very important that that organization is the one who has the signatories, who is we're getting the W-9 and EFT from, because that is the organization that's going to be paid, whether it's a college, university, municipality, there's another fiscal agent, parent, whoever is applying for this. That's who is going to be getting paid. That is who we need to confirm the information from. So that's very important. And if you have a parent, or if you have a fiscal agent that corresponds with this grant.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
I just want to point out that in this particular program, we don't allow fiscal agents, but Mark is dealing with the hundreds and hundreds of applications in the Creative Experiences Grant Program, which does allow fiscal agents. So in this one, we do allow parent organizations, which have to be either a municipality or a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Lillian, do we have questions for Mark?
We have quite a few questions, yes. The first one, two different questions, but kind of the same thing, is how do you change a contract authorized signatory or contract authorized officer? What do they need to do to update that information if it's no longer accurate from the application?
So I believe there's a couple of ways of doing it. That I think you're allowed to. The best way to do it, I would say, is email our help desk along with the grants team, and just reiterate your program and what's being changed. And then what we can do is we can go into the grants management system and change that and update it, and then we can get out the new forms. So I would definitely recommend reaching out. Do you guys have the help desk email that we could give in the chat? I don't have it in front of me, but there is that help desk email that we do try to, oh, perfect, there it is, that we will monitor, so that if you do have stuff like that, definitely email that.
And just to follow up on that, so when Mark says also email the programs team, you should have a specific program staff contact. So that will either be myself, Lillian Lee, Sarah Glidden, or Lindiana Flores, and you can see who your staff contact is in your organizational profile in that grants portal. So if you're unsure which of the organization's team members to contact, you can always look that up in that grants portal, or you can email the general organizations team, organizations.masscultural@mass.gov email box if you're having trouble locating who your staff contact is.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Oh, is there another one?
There are many more.
Okay, I'll
next
pause.
question. The next question is, the contract timeline says final report due in June 2026, but is that really the first annual report?
Yes, that is the annual report for this grant program.
So yeah, just a small naming thing that the agency often uses annual report and final report interchangeably. That's just a matter of kind of semantics. The important thing is you will have a report for the program due in June of every year.
Thank you.
Another organization asks, They got a DocuSign contract, but didn't see a place to submit their W-9. Is there someone I can email it to instead?
So the DocuSign, usually when you receive a DocuSign from the state that comes from us, once you fill that out and hit submit, it automatically comes back to us. I think that's what they're asking. I mean, you can also email the help desk with that file as well, but we usually receive the DocuSign back once it's filled out.
And then the next one, two different organizations are asking about what do we do if our PO box is our legal address in the state system?
That one I will have to circle back on because usually we'd still use the PO box, but they have been recently asking, like up at the comptroller's office, for a legal address. So I believe that needs to be some sort of legal address, but I can circle back on that one for the more accurate answer. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay, perfect. And once we hear back from Mark about that, we can always email the two who had that question directly. So we do have it registered who asked that question. So we will be able to follow up with you after this session, just for reference. I'm trying to, there's another question here, but it seems very, very specific to the like actual, our organization has this very specific problem. So I'm going to recommend that you follow up with the finance.helpdesk@mass.gov email, and I'll type that as a response to your question as well. But I think those are all the general questions at this time.
Great. Thank you. So you got a grant. And first, again, congratulations. It was, there were a lot of applications and we were not able to fund anywhere near as many as we would love to fund. So the fact that you were successful in this process is definitely a tribute to how well your answers aligned with the criteria of this grant program. So congratulations. Now that you have gotten a grant, and like I said, this will be renewed each year. You'll get another grant contract, another experience of this whole process through fiscal 29, at which point you would need to apply again to be eligible for funding after fiscal 29. The way that you stay in the pool to get that grant every year are the requirements for this program. So first of all, the annual report. And the annual report includes you providing your most recent 990 or 990 EZ. And it has to be updated from the last time. So whatever, if you gave us fiscal 23 as part of your application last spring, you have to provide fiscal 24. If you provided fiscal 24, you need to provide fiscal 25. And we can show you, we will show you in the grant system where you can find that information. Secondly, as part of the contract, you will be signing a credit and publicity requirement. And there will be information about using our logo, about how to properly cite Mass Cultural Council as one of your funders. You need to remain eligible. So, for example, an organization had to have a minimum of a 3-year average of expenses of over $50,000. That will continue. If when we average out your expenses on your 990s over 3 years, if it drops below $50,000, that can result in your organization being suspended. Secondly, your primary mission programming is in the arts, humanities, sciences, and at least 50% of that work is taking place in Massachusetts. So if you decide to move your programs across the border into New Hampshire, you're probably not going to be eligible for this program anymore. And also, you're incorporated in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or you're registered as a foreign corporation because your original incorporation happened elsewhere. And your tax status, which gives you that 501c3 tax status, must remain active. So occasionally, if you have not been on top of providing your annual reports to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or your tax reporting to the IRS, they will revoke your tax status or your incorporation status, at that point you would not be eligible for this grant program. So it's always a good idea to check every so often to make sure that the Secretary of the Commonwealth has your incorporation reports, which are due every year in November. So if you haven't done it yet, this is a good time to flag that for you, that you need to be doing your annual reports to the Commonwealth. And then the IRS has publicly available reports. We can actually see your tax returns on the IRS site. The annual report does a couple of things for us. First of all, it's a way for us to confirm or update your contact information. If your executive director changes or your grants manager or development person changes, this is a time for you to let us know, if not sooner, but this is definitely the touch point for you to update your contact information with us. There is a page of your annual report where you can update the signatory names and contact information. So all that stuff that Mark was just talking about, at the end of this year, when you do the annual report, you can update that so it will be correct for when we launch the grant contract process for the following year. You'll need to provide the 990 or 990 EZ, and there's a place for you to upload that. A 990N is not acceptable. It has to be the 990 or the 990 EZ, and it must be for the correct fiscal year. If you are a cultural affiliate, again, those are programs that exist within a larger nonprofit organization, there's a separate financial reporting form. There's a pop-up in the annual report system. You just click on the teal box that says cultural affiliate financial report, and you fill that out. You do not need to fill that out if you have your own 501c3 status and you're providing your tax form. There are some questions in our annual report that we are required to ask because the National Endowment for the Arts requires that of us, because we receive funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. What gets a little confusing is we start talking about a lot of different fiscal years. So this will be your annual report for your fiscal 26 grant. You might be providing us with a 990 for fiscal 25 or fiscal 24. The National Endowment for the Arts wants you to answer their questions based on the current fiscal year, which is July 1st of 25 through June 30th of 2026. And we realize that this means that you're answering these questions a month before that fiscal year is over. Don't worry about that. It is okay for you to estimate either your expenses or your participation in programs for that final month of the fiscal year. We take this information and report it as part of our annual report to the National Endowment for the Arts. We provide that information in aggregate. So we add together all of our grantee organization information and submit that as part of our annual report. So it is not going to be a devastating thing if you underestimate or slightly overestimate finances or participation. This is the most important thing that I can say today. That annual report to us is due by midnight on June 2nd. If you miss that deadline, we will reduce your grant for the following year by 25%. And telling us the next morning that your computer didn't work or that your internet went down is not going to make a difference to that. So please do not wait until the last couple of hours to submit the report. If you miss that June 2nd deadline, we give you a week of extension for you to get that done. If you don't submit it all, including your tax form by June 10th, there will not be a grant for you in fiscal 27. Now you can come back into the pool for fiscal 28. You'll have to meet the reporting requirements, and I hope we don't have this conversation with anybody, but if we do, we will walk you through it. But we would much rather have you get your annual report into us before the deadline, so it is not a relevant issue. So where is that annual report? If you are the grant contact for your organization, when you log into our grants management system, and you see your dashboard. Here's your dashboard. That annual report is going to show up there at the bottom of the page under requires attention, pending reports. So click on that and you will find your report. If you are an organization that we have identified as receiving federal funds, you will see not only the annual report for this grant, you will see the federal funds report as well. If you are one of those organizations, you already know it. We've already had that conversation with you. In fact, you've probably already completed your contract. So if we haven't had that communication with you, it's not relevant to you. The other thing on this screen that's really important is in the upper right-hand corner, organization profile. When you click on organization profile, you will see multiple tabs. Here it is. You click on that organization profile, you see these different tabs, the additional address information, about, staff contact. That one, we like to think it's important. That's where you discover which one of us on staff is your primary staff contact, and it has our phone number and email. And then the very important screen for this particular conversation today is the operating support information. So the first thing that's really important here is the grant expiration year. That's telling you what is the final year of your grant in this particular grant program. So in the example that we have on the screen, this is an organization that will receive its final grant from this program for fiscal 29. Right below that, you see annual required financial report and the fiscal year report required. This is the fiscal year that we are expecting you to provide the 990 or 990 EZ. So in this particular organization's case, that's their fiscal 24. So do not send us fiscal 23 if we're asking for 24 or any other alterations of that. And then finally, underneath that, once we have received your annual report and your tax reporting, we, Lindiana, Lillian, and I, review that information and we go back into the system, and where it currently says, please select, we will change that to yes or no. So if you have any questions about whether or not you have completed your reporting, you can always check there. It is manually done. It is done by us as staff actually looking at the information. So it's not an instantaneous thing where you submit and then it automatically shows up as completed. We have to actually read through it. So give us a day or so to get that done. This is probably one of the questions we get most often. What are you going to do if you're not going to have your 990 or your 990 EZ in time to submit it to us on June 2nd? Well, first of all, one of the reasons we're telling you this now in November is that we're hoping that you can work that into your timing and appropriate planning, so you will have it in time to submit as part of your annual report. Once we get to late spring, we will start sending you so many reminders. We will send you lots of reminders telling you about the annual report deadline, and also including instructions on what to do if you're not going to have your 990 in time. If that happens, if your accountant, is not able to complete it, for example, we do have policies and structures in place for what to do and what to provide for us in the absence of having the 990 and 990 EZ. And we will send you those instructions that will tell you what you need to provide to us. You will have to provide that to us by that June 2nd deadline. And you still need to submit the rest of the annual report. So even if we have provided you with an extension for the 990, 990 EZ forms, you still have to complete the online annual report and submit it to us by the June 2nd deadline. I'm going to pause here before I move on to how the grant amounts are calculated for future years and see if we have questions on the annual report process.
Yes, 2 questions on that. And then just to let the person know, I do see your question about grant awards. I'm going to hold that question until we get to the how grant awards are calculated section. But but we have not forgotten your question, and I promise we will answer it. But the two questions specifically about the annual report, the first one is, when will we receive the questions for the annual report?
Ah.
In other words, how long do we have from the time we
Great.
see the questions until it's due?
Great. So typically what happens is once your contract is executed, your account is now in the pipeline for getting the annual report activated. And we're doing some tweaks to the annual report. That is a little bit of a pause. My expectation is that if your contract is executed in November, December, we're probably not going to have your annual report ready for you until sometime in January, February at the latest. If you don't get your contract executed until sometime in early 26, the annual report will automatically get put into your account when your contract gets executed. Again, that's you've signed it, we have countersigned it and authorized payments. Under no situation will the annual report be any later in your profile than the beginning of May. And the questions are truly very easy. The questions that we are asking you are along the lines of, are you still doing programming in Massachusetts? Are you still eligible for this grant? We have some questions about work that you might be doing cross-sector. So if your organization, let's say, is collaborating with housing or health organizations, we'd like to know about that. And if that's not you, you just say not applicable. The questions from the National Endowment for the Arts are also very straightforward. They are primarily looking to know what your income and expenses are for this grant year, the year that you're getting the grant in and for, and they want to know participation both in person and digital, and then breaking that out between free participation and participation with admission fees. So if you're able to say, you know, your 5 concerts had a total of 2,000 people attending plus another 100 online, and that, you know, whatever percentage of those were complimentary admissions, then you're going to have the information in place to be able to answer those questions. But we're going to have those available to you as soon as we can. Next.
Okay, the other question is more of a kind of navigation question for the grants portal itself when looking at how do we access this contract, who has access to the contract. So does each person get a separate login for the portal under their organization, or do we have to share the login within the org?
So your organization can have multiple logins. The quirky aspect is that only the person who is the primary contact for the grant will have access to the reports or to the grant contract information. So you might have a staff of 10 people in development, and only the one person who is the contact person will be able to see the annual report or the contract. So some organizations, you know, they share a login among their staff, or they might use an info at or grants at or development at email address. Your email address is your unique identifier for your profile. I think using a sort of generic grants at kind of email can be really helpful, because that means if you have turnover in the position, the new person can use that same grants at email address and be able to have access to everything. Otherwise, folks will contact Lillian, Lindiana, and me, and we will go in and change previous contracts and things so that the new person has that information available to them. Any
All
other
right,
questions?
those are all the questions specific to the
Okay.
annual report.
Fabulous. Okay. So how are grant amounts calculated? We have a mathematical formula that takes 3 years of your organization's expenses and calculates the grant amount. So obviously the most important piece of information here is your organization's expenses, and we pull this from your 990 or 990 EZ. Or in the case of the cultural affiliates, we pull this information from the financial report form for the cultural affiliates. The other hugely important issue is how much has the legislature allocated to Mass Cultural Council as part of the state's annual budgeting process. If our allocation increases, then there's the possibility that we can allocate internally more money to this grant program. If our legislative appropriation decreases, it's likely that we would have to decrease the amount of money allocated to this grant program. The legislature has been very supportive of us over the years. We have received increases in many years, but not every year. This year we were approximately level funded, and in a year of some uncertainty, we think that this is a sign of terrific support from our governor and our legislature, and we are very pleased with that. When the Commonwealth begins its budgeting process in the spring, you will probably hear from us about, what the governor proposed in her budget, what the House proposed in their version of the budget, what the Senate approved in their portion of the budget. A couple of things, if you are not already signed up for our email news, we encourage you to do that, and you can find that on our homepage. The other thing is, if you have not already joined Mass Creative, hugely encourage you to do that. They will also keep you informed about what's going on here. So again, your expenses over a 3-year period, the legislative appropriation, the funds allocated to this specific grant program within Mass Cultural Council spending plan. And then what is the grant maximum and grant minimum in this program? So nobody's going to get less than the minimum, which is a $6,000 grant. The only reason they would get less than that minimum is if they missed the deadline and had a penalty to their grant amount. There's also a cap on the grant amounts in this program. We look at those every year, but we don't always change them. And then finally, we have what we call equity impact points. These are 2 issues. First of all, organizations that have completed the BIPOC-centered self-identification form, we'll see that impacting their grant amount, and our financial health analysis. And this is something that we started last year, where we've taken the information available on the 990 EZs and calculated a determination of an organization's financial health or fragility. And we've been able to provide a slight increase to the grantee organizations that are showing up as particularly fragile in this grant program. Any questions on that?
Yes, 2 questions about this. One, is the grant award the same each year?
Nope, it won't be the same each year, because if your expenses grow or your expenses decrease as you report them on your 990, then that number will change. So an organization, if everything else stays the same and an organization's expenses grow over time, you could potentially see that your grant amount will increase because your organization has gotten larger. On the flip side, if your organization's expenses decrease over time, you might see that your grant amount decreases. If the legislature either increases or decreases how much they give us annually, we've got less money to deal with. So that will impact your grant amount. And then again, the grants, the funds that we allocate to this specific program, Mass Cultural Council takes its annual allocation and its money from the National Endowment for the Arts and puts that money in a variety of buckets: the local cultural councils, our grants for creative individuals, our youth reach program, our creative experiences grants. All of that's part of a spending plan that our council, which is like our board, but the governing council of Mass Cultural Council, meets in August to approve that. And that's sort of the final step in determining what money is available to this program. So I would pretty much expect your grant will change from year to year. Whether that change means $100 or $1,000 is really going to be all of these factors calculated together.
Great. And then another question is, what is the funding cap or the maximum for this program?
In this year, in fiscal 26 and in fiscal 25, the maximum grant amount is $55,000.
So just to reiterate, because we had another question about is 6,000 the most an organization can receive? So no, the range of grants, the minimum grant amount is $6,000, barring penalties, as Sarah mentioned previously, and the maximum is $55,000 for this year. So that is the funding range. So all organizations who receive an award fall somewhere within that range based on the formula factors previously mentioned.
And one thing that might be helpful to you in the FAQ for this grant program, for the applications that came in during fiscal 25 funding this year, in the FAQ, we have a section about grant amount ranges, and it identifies organizations with a 3-year average of expenses from 50,000 to 125,000, for example, would likely see a grant someplace between 6,000 and whatever. So knowing what your expenses are, you could take a look at that chart and, get at least a ballpark perspective of what your grant amount is likely to be. And again, all of that is subject to change because all of these factors are subject to change.
Okay, one final question. Should the BIPOC-centered organization self-identification be submitted every year? It shows up as an opportunity, even though it's been submitted previously.
Yeah, it continues to show up because that's what the grant system does. If your organization has submitted that and it's been approved, that is good, I believe, for 5 years. And the staff person who works with that particular program would be notifying organizations directly when it is time for that to be renewed. The program hasn't existed for 5 years yet, so nobody has to renew at this time. So again, just a reiteration of our timeline. The annual report will be available in winter, spring of 26, but no later than really the 1st of May. The annual report due Tuesday, June 2nd, submitted by basically midnight. And then the grant notification for your fiscal 27 grant will happen in early September of 2026. So I mentioned the process that the legislature and the governor's office go through to approve the budget for the Commonwealth every year. That typically gets finalized sometime in July. And our spending plan goes in front of our governing council in late August. That's when everything finally gets approved. Once that has happened, we can notify organizations by early September of what their fiscal 27 grant will be. And it's not in this system and the information we've been reviewing today, but we do have some organizations that might be eligible for the Youth Reach program. Youth Reach is a specific grant program focused on organizations that are working with youth out of school. That program will have an application due sometime late next spring. An organization can receive Youth Reach or operating grants, you can't receive both. But the Youth Reach grants are a flat amount. So unlike this program where your grant amount has all these factors that feed into the amount, the Youth Reach is a flat amount. If you are a smallish organization, but your focus is really on youth development, you might find that the Youth Reach grant actually is more advantageous to your organization. So you can only receive one grant, but you can apply for the Youth Reach grant. And if you're successful in that, you can choose to take that grant and to decline this grant, the second year of your operating grant. So my colleague, Kata Swabak, is the program officer who works with that program. I know they are finalizing all kinds of things in that now, and the new guidelines will be posted sometime in early 2026. Do we have any additional questions? I know we've dumped a lot of information on you today.
So one question that just came in is, when are payments expected for fiscal year 26?
I'm going to kick that to our friend Mark.
Thank you. It's so you'll have a better idea. So once we trigger the DocuSign that sends the standard contract to you for signature, gives you kind of a rough idea of when you're going to get the payment. Usually, once that gets sent out, it's usually around maybe like 1 to 2 weeks after you receive that. Again, it's very dependent on what we have on file. We're trying to get them out as soon as possible. We'd hope, if you feel like you have everything in, we hope that in December, January, that we'll start to shoot out payments. But again, it's very dependent on what we have on file. But again, we're trying to get them out as soon as we can.
So the grant contract has to be executed before the payment
Correct.
gets
So,
started.
yep. So once that DocuSign with the grant contract goes out, it will go out for signature. When we receive that back, then our CFO will be able to execute it, and then it will go into our bucket to pay. So that's one of the kind of triggers, I guess, for you to have like a better understanding of when you'll receive payment.
Yeah. And if your grant amount is $7,000 or less, you will get the entire amount of your grant payment when the contract is executed. If your grant amount is larger than that, you will receive 80%. So when the amount comes in and you look at it and think, well, that isn't the amount we were awarded, it's probably because you got 80% of the grant award. The final 20% happens after you submit your annual report. So there's another incentive for doing your annual report, because that's when you'll get the final 20% of the grant amount for this year. And those will happen in June. So once we've got that annual report in and we've approved it, payment happens, pretty quickly.
Yes.
All right. We've had a few more questions come in.
Okay.
One is, and I'm combining your two questions into one, just so you know. Will organizations be able to apply for creative experiences or cultural facilities fund grants during the 4 years that they have this grant?
Okay, so not for creative experiences. That falls into the you can only get one grant. So, and this grant is both more money than the creative experiences, and it's multiple years. So you are already in the most advantageous grant program for organizations. Cultural Facilities Fund is the one exception to that. It is entirely separate. So you can receive a Cultural Facilities Fund grant and an operating grant at the same time. Cultural Facilities Fund applications are open now, and I know that they do office hours every Tuesday and Thursday morning to answer questions. You can find that in our agency dates section of our website. That's on our homepage. But yeah, absolutely apply for that if you are eligible and you have a capital project that you are looking to fund.
Great. The next question is, does everyone complete an NEA final report in July, or only some organizations that get grants that include that funding? And then I'll just kind of add to this a follow-up of, can you talk about how organizations know?
Okay, so there are some NEA questions that everybody has to answer, and those are in our regular annual report that's due June 2nd. The question that's being asked here is getting deeply into the weeds. We get funds from the National Endowment for the Arts. We could say that everybody gets a little portion of National Endowment for the Arts money, in which case everyone would have to complete the federal funds report. We think it is more reasonable to identify that specific organizations are receiving their grant from federal funds, or they are Mass Cultural Council's match to the federal funds. If you are one of those organizations that has been identified as receiving federal funds, you've already gotten your contract. You've already moved farther along in this process than Mark has described. So you've already gotten that in your grant notification. There's a paragraph that specifically identifies that the funds for this grant come from the National Endowment for the Arts. So you already know it. If you've already gotten your grant payment, you got federal funds.
Great. All right. The next question is, will we need to change our portal login information and signatories if the staff member involved in receiving the grant is different from the staff member who originally applied, who is no longer working here?
Yeah, the contract. So depending on your organization, you might be the person who is the grant contact, and therefore you are receiving our notifications, and you're the person who has access to the grant information in your profile in our grants management system. That doesn't mean you're the person who signs the forms. So those are two separate things. Changing the names of the people who sign the forms or authorize that is the CASL, the contract authorized signatory listing forms that Mark was talking about. And in many ways, that's easier to change. If you are the contact person in your organization who can see the grant in your profile in our grants management system and you leave, then yes, the new person needs to have their own account, and we'll have to change. We, the staff, will move grant contracts over to the new person who's managing it. That's why I was suggesting some organizations, rather than using, Sarah at artsorganization.com, use grants at artsorganization.com, whatever your ID is. And that allows you to pass that forward to the next person who has that responsibility at your organization. Although I would encourage you to change the password credentials if you have staff turnover.
All right, looks like we just have two more questions.
Okay.
Is Youth Reach an open application, or is it only available to those awarded in Massachusetts? It says cultural grant. I'm wondering if they mean operating grant for organization. They understand that organizations can only have one, but they're wondering if anyone can apply to Youth Reach.
Any organization that meets the eligibility requirements may apply.
There is no prerequisite of you have to already be receiving X grant from the council to apply to Youth Reach.
Thank you. I did not understand that part of the question. No, there is no prerequisite for applying for a Youth Reach grant as long as your organization meets the eligibility requirements.
Great, thank you. And then the next one is, will we have access to these slides?
Yes, the program has been recorded today, and with a little bit of editing, we will be able to put that on our YouTube channel, and we will send an email out, not just to the folks who signed up for this program, but to all of our grantees in this program with the slide attachment.
Okay, it looks like those are all of the open questions at this time about the presentation.
Great. Well, great questions. You kept me on my toes. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to my colleagues, Lillian, Mark, and Lindiana, and Christian, who's here in the background. Thank you again to Patty, our service provider, who managed the CART process. We greatly appreciate your participation today. Thank you, everyone. And again, congratulations.